Get set, go! And the Cincinnati Flying Pig Marathon and Queen Bee Half Marathon are underway. Good luck.
Well, hello, J14. Thank you for being with us. Betsy Ross here. And, we've been talking a little bit about putting together events and how you do it and really what goes behind it. I think so many of us are so used to seeing events and we see it from a guest perspective, but sometimes you have to look behind the curtain, behind the scenes to see all the work that goes into an event. And especially when you're talking about safety, safety at events, everybody knows that has been ramped up in the last 10, 15 years. And that goes into the planning as well, how you plan for a crisis and then hope you never have to execute that crisis plan. Well, with me today is Lori Salzarulo. She is with 11 events, and she has worked on just about every big event there is in Cincinnati, from 600,000 people at Taste of Cincinnati and Oktoberfest Cincinnati to running events, which we'll talk about today, and some of the Bengal tailgate events that are connected with Bengal home games. So we will talk a little bit about planning for those events, but mostly the crisis planning for those events. Lori, thanks so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So talk a little bit first about when you are assigned an event or when someone says, okay, I want you to help us with that event. Tell us first the steps that you go through to plan the event, and then we'll get into the details of crisis planning.
Sure. The first thing is really all about, and just to step back, most of the events, in fact, all of the large events that I do are outdoors. So it does involve, for the most part, street closures. So really the first and the biggest question is, where do you want to have this event and how many people are we talking about? And is it multi-day or one day? Because that all does take into effect when we get into the safety piece of this, those components. So really it's about where you want this event to be. Again, what is the size? What are you expecting for this crowd? And then again, is it one day? Is it multi-day in those times? That's the first thing I look at. And then we dig in deeper from there in the details of infrastructure and bringing in the city departments to discuss, safety issues.
You have to bring in city departments or municipal departments wherever you go. If you cross into Northern Kentucky, if you're familiar with the Cincinnati area, you'll just go across a bridge and you're in Northern Kentucky. So you're in a different state, you're in a different municipality.
It's a great point, because honestly, you have to have their sign off before you can do anything. Look at Blink as a case in point for those of you that might know about Blink and the fact that it did cross the river, and a lot of these events do, but it also involved drones and things over the water, which means then you're bringing in the Coast Guard, then you're bringing in the FAA. So yeah, not only are we dealing with 2 to 3 different city municipalities, we're dealing with federal, to your point, and getting their approval before we can even begin to really get into the detail of laying out what this is going to look like on the street, on the river, on the bridges, whatever that looks like.
Let us hone in on the Heart Mini Marathon and what you do for your crisis plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And the crisis plan that, and Betsy, I shared that with you. So there are a couple of different, I want to step back, and there are a couple of different, there are maybe 4 or 5 different areas of crisis that we are concerned with that we really have to drill down on. And I'll just run through them briefly and then I can dig into them. And it's not on this plan specifically, but I just will run these down. One is clearly, as I said, outdoor events. Weather is number one. In terms of right out of the gate, you're outside, lightning, wind, rain, what does that look like? Secondarily, for a race specifically, would be injury and illness. We've got whether there is an incident, not ever wanting to think about worst case scenario. If there is a fire, which, the Flying Pig Marathon and here in Cincinnati, how many years back, Betsy, went through that where there was a fire and they had to reroute part of the race. But, if there is, God forbid, a bombing, a shooting, a car driving into the event, all of those pieces have to be thought through very, very specifically. And then again, bringing in the right city departments or multiple city departments to discuss, what does that plan look like? What are we planning for? Worst case scenario in every one of these sections and areas to then have a plan in place. This specifically, this area is where everyone is going to be meeting either prior or after. This is the densest area for population. So this is also where a lot of our crisis planning was around. So again, talking about police and fire specifically, when we sat down with them and figured out, okay, what do we need to make sure of? Obviously, we need to make sure with a race that there is an on-site medic tent, like a makeshift hospital, so to speak, as much as you can have one. So we had that down on site near, a little down from where the yellow is, where it's the CCHMC. We had 5 medic units out on the course. We had fire bike teams that were medics out on the course. We had another, like a gator golf cart type of thing that was out on the course that might need to get to someone. All of those folks, in addition to my operations team and police, were all also on an event radio that we could easily communicate. There is no way cell phones can work in any kind of an event like this anymore. It's just the Wi-Fi isn't strong enough. You can't reach people. So we have learned to really rely on event radios that are able to talk miles and miles away for really quick communication. So from a fire perspective, and for injury and illness, for anything like that, that is really where we've honed in for the fire piece and injury. With police, again, to this area, it's a very you can see the wide streets. You can see how wide streets are. Any kind of a car, if they, and Cincinnati, if you've been here or not, it's a very grid city. You can get speed going and just barrel through something really easily on almost any street in downtown Cincinnati, which is a focal point for the police. So we have barricades, whether they are semi trucks, whether they are water barricades. I'm sure you've seen at other sporting events that are, 1,000 pounds that are filled with water, concrete barricades. We've brought all of that in to ensure that any place that someone can get speed going, and this all goes back to Nice, France. This is where that truck went through that event.
Right.
Once that happened, everything changed for us here in terms of barricading in. And I'll get to that in another event that I can show a little more clearly, but with the Bengals. But for this event, it was the same thing. We had to barricade ourselves in. It's not pretty. It doesn't look good, but it is functional and it is necessary. So that is probably, from an initial planning purpose for Cincinnati, for police and fire, it is, where do we put everyone out on the course that we can get to someone as quickly as possible if there is injury or illness, and where can we protect everyone with barricading so that there can't be someone barreling into that event, into a crowd of patrons.
And it's one of these things that you don't just get up on race morning and say, oh, we need to put a truck down here. This is something that is planned. This is something that, you have to get the semi in there. You have to get the water barrels in there. It's something that you plan weeks, months in advance.
Months. I mean, we have to know what truck is going where, the size of that truck, the footprint of that truck, knowing who's driving that truck, how quickly we can get that truck moved if we do have to get a fire truck through that way. So it's a domino effect completely. You're absolutely right. And it's a timing perspective. I have a production timeline that literally on Saturday morning at 5 a.m. this truck goes into place, but we've got the cell number of the person and we know where those keys are. The barricades we know are dropped and they're getting pulled at X time. The medics, we know exactly where every medic unit is going and knowing they've got a radio on every point on the course. So all of that is vetted out, I'd say, 6 weeks in advance, and then tweaked and gone through again. And then we have an ops meeting where everybody comes together. Traffic and engineering is another city department that's involved. They're the ones bringing the barricades. So all of that is like a big dance to make sure that we know where everything is, but we've got everything down to the detail of a cell number for every single person we need. And then what that plan is for communication on site if something does happen.
And you mentioned, Lori, quickly about the Bengals tailgates. That's another event that we're working on right now. The Bengals tailgate, and if you have been to a Colts game, or even if you have been to a Bengals game, you have seen probably some of the tailgates that happen beforehand. Most of the time, the city, sometimes the team itself puts on this event, but it's just a way to get people down, frankly, to spend a little more money. But again, you have thousands of people and you have them in a contained space, and there is alcohol, so you have to factor that into it. So let's talk a little bit about how you organize these tailgates, again, to keep people safe in this environment.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And again, all of you know, I'm sure, that the Bengals have done very well over the past few years, which means the crowds are even bigger and they're longer. And so every place that you see on this map where it says Race Street, if to the left of that is where Paycor Stadium is, where the Bengals play. Everything that is yellow on this map, and I realize it's not a pretty map, but it's functional for us. Every place that is yellow is a vehicle that is serving as a barricade. So all of the blocks down below that say VOL, that's volunteer. Those are about, I have to put about 15 cars to prevent anyone from driving across a bridge going right up into a grassy area that would barrel you right through where it says care source. So, you know, having a car that could jump a sidewalk, that's why it says vehicle on the street corners. So literally we barricade ourselves in with cars and trucks so that no one, because it is a pretty open space in a lot of those pieces of those streets down there, to ensure that everyone that is in that space, and these events run for 3 hours and it is slammed inside of there. So it is definitely, I mean, thousands of people are in a 2.5 block, 3 block radius that we really need to make sure that nothing can get through. And so that's why we've built this out the way that it is. But it's, you just have to err on the side of safety, and it can't worry about the aesthetics, unfortunately, these days. So
That's very true. So looking at all the events that you do, what are 3 things that you think of that anyone who is planning an event, what are the 3 things they look for in their crisis planning?
Number 1 is communicating with police and with your city municipalities right out of the gate. They've got to be a partner of yours. Consider yourselves all a partner in the same goal. So meeting with them and discussing what they want your plan to be, because I'll be honest, I'm not the one controlling that plan. It is their plan that I'm executing. So that is number 1, knowing that they are going to tell you what you need to do, and that is what you're going to execute with their support. Number 2, where's your event? What are all of the possibilities that could happen? If it's indoor, what indoor could happen at your event that you need to worry about? Where are entry points, exit points? And if it's outdoor, what does that layout look like if you're using private property for some reason, like we use P&G Gardens? Just knowing your surroundings and knowing what those possible issues could be. And again, if you're outdoor, weather. I mean, weather is a big one. But again, knowing what you can do with people, what you have to do with folks to get them out of that weather and where they're going. Plan. Where are parking garages around there? Where can they get inside really quickly? And that really is for any incident. But my number 1 thought is, what is the city telling me? What does my space look like? What do I need to protect people from? And whether, if it's outdoor, where are they going first? Because that weather, especially in this area, it hits so quickly. It could be beautiful and we don't even have anything predicted and it's going to come through. I need to know where I'm sending everyone and what that communication plan looks like on my team to get that out to everyone, vendors, bands, our operations folks, and then of course patrons, to get them to safety.
Well, thank you so much for your expertise and just your advice on how to put together an event and make sure you have that crisis plan and make sure that it's a plan that it will work. Lori, thanks so much.
Thank you.